Hey, and welcome everyone to today's presentation. It might look a little bit different as it is instead a video on one of the best graphic novels there is, Mouse by Art Spiegelman. This video is for the class reading graphic novels with Dr. Patel. The video was created and voiced by me, Hans Reimann. So, what's the plan for today's video? First, we want to have a look at the book itself, some general information you need to know about Mouse. Next, we want to get to know the artist himself, Art Spiegelman, his career in comics and his achievements. After that, let's have a look at the drawing. What makes this comic a typical comic in sense of writing and drawing? Let's then look at the contents and the story of the book. I expect you to have read it, at least the majority of it, so I will only talk about certain elements that struck me the most. After that, we close the book again to look at it as a whole and have a short discussion about it. By no means this video will give you all the information there is about Mouse, but at least I will give you some points to start, some interesting points to dig deeper into. And maybe there's one or the other information you can use for one of your homeworks or your essays later on, as this book is brilliant in so many ways. But let us not get carried away yet. First, we need to do some housekeeping, some general information we need to get out of the way first, so we can talk about the book properly later on. So, the obvious question is, why Mouse? Well, if you read the same book I did, you know it's incredibly unique, and even most critics agree, even though it's not the common type of literature they read, and its political message is important to this day. Back then, it was quite hard for a comic to get media attention, less nowadays, and so Mouse finally gets into the mainstream and into the schools where it really belongs. So, there's another question we need to discuss about the cover first. Why cats as Nazis? Well, while we get into that question with all its seriousness later on, there's a weird coincidence. There's a British website called Cats That Look Like Hitler. Well, while it's weird enough such a website exists in the first place, there are actually people posting their cats. They're called Diddler or Der Führer, or even Blitzkrieg. So what's up with that? That's quite odd and a weird coincidence to the book. So, if any of you are interested in that and want to do some research, let me know. I'm curious for your results. But let's get back to the topic. It's about racist looking cats, or even racist cats in first place, so we're not that far off right now. First, let's get this general information out of the way. The author was Art Spiegelman, and the book had its first full release in 1991. But since 1980 already, one chapter was released every couple of months in the magazine Raw, and the first 6 chapters were published as a book in 1986. But the most memorable information to me is that Mouse was the first graphic novel to ever win a Pulitzer Prize. It's hard to imagine, but back then, graphic novels and comics were merely more than childish books, and one to win a Pulitzer Prize was incredible. I would like to end the general information page with something common. The whole work summarized in one sentence, but I think that's pretty much impossible to do for Mouse, as you will see and might agree later on. But it's safe to say in just one sentence that Mouse brought comics to academic attention. It might be to Mouse that we have in this class in the first place. It might be thanks to Mouse that comics and graphic novels slowly dig their way into the literary and cultural studies. And we have Mouse today thanks to one certain person, the author and artist, Art Spiegelman. here in his younger years. He was born back in 1948 and started drawing as a child already, mainly comic strips and cartoon pictures for his friends. Even though Art started publishing in a school newspaper, he quickly got the jump to a local newspaper. He had his first professional job as a cartoonist with 15 years only, and eventually published his first independent comic stripe, Prisoner on Planet Hell, after his mother committed suicide. After that, Art got together with Francois Molly in 1976. Both together published the famous Raw magazine for upcoming American artists and international comic artists. It was there that Art published his mouse comics for the first time. But before we get to that part of the video, let's talk about something different first. Art had publishings after mouse as well. One, for example, is The Shadow of Night Towers. It was published in German Zeit magazine and deals with 9/11. Let's make a cut here with Art Spiegelman and go to the art and drawing of mouse. On the left we have a part of the comic book. On the right we have a self-portrait of the artist. On some facts we want to check if mouse is a comic in the sense that we defined it in class. First off, there are 1,500 panels. All are black and white with high contrast and little to no gray. Art himself says that he usually uses an 8-panel grid he violates constantly, and that his stories are text-driven, even though they are comics. So let's combine that with our last lesson and ask ourselves, how does this interact with McCloud's understanding of comics? If I remember correctly, he defined comics as sequential art. And if we look at the panel on the left and our facts, there's no doubt. Even if we extend the definition like McCloud did to juxtapose pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence, it still fits perfectly. So what we have here is a good example of a typical comic. After this not so unexpected realization, let's look at mouse exactly from that perspective, from the perspective of a comic, and look what interesting details we can find in mouse as a comic, and what might be special compared to other comics. If we study those two panels carefully, we might find that the arty in the comics seems to be self-aware. He knows he's in a comic and communicates about it, and to a certain extent he might be aware of his readers. So did he actually break the fourth wall back then when it was not that common? While that does not seem to be special from today's point of view, we need to keep in mind that the comic book was written last century, and that back then that was not a so common practice. So here's a good point to dig deeper if you're into it, and let's go to the next topic for the rest of us. Well, now we'll probably get to the part you could talk days about, but I will try to keep it short and only give insights into a couple of ideas. Let's start with a short quote by our artist, and I think it might capture the spirit of the book pretty good. To me, this quote captures the seriousness and darkness of the graphic novel and the topic, and how we still struggle to this day to deal with it in an adequate way. And it's odd to see mice as the protagonists, like it's a fable. According to Spiegelman, he got the idea when he saw Jewish people depicted as vermin in German propaganda to make them look evil and dirty and untrustworthy. Further, it plays with the cat and mouse scheme of the Nazis as cats, the cats that play with their prey until it dies. But let's go one step further after we kind of dealt with that question about mice. Why animals in the first place? And here I found a quote that at least explains it to me. No publisher would have ever touched this book. Just imagine the book with people instead of mice. Just have a look at this panel from Mouse. Try to imagine a movie showing a similar or the same scene with real people burning alive. But there are even panels that didn't make it into the graphic novel. Maybe you want to research into that direction and dig deeper. But for now we can conclude. While the use of animals makes it look less scary and less realistic, and might try to take a little bit of the darkness out of the topic, it still stays in a strong contrast to animals usually being used in children's books and fables. But there are other reasons as well. One, for example, is that they serve the purpose of distinction and its ambivalence when it comes to distinction inside the so-called human race. This panel pretty much hits the nail on the head when it comes to the quote. We have a person once been depicted as a cat and once as a mouse. He's a Jewish German person, so what is he? It shows the ambivalence of distinction inside the so-called human race. This panel up here shows another advantage of using animals. Similar to the first panel, this one pretty much speaks for itself when you use the quote on it. But it's a good starting point anyway to dig deeper into Spiegelman's use of animals. I think there are no boundaries pretty much, and I'm curious where you might end up. But for us, we might stop here. Finally, let's take a big step back and relax for a second. Let's look at the work itself, the work as a whole. I've barely scratched the surface of the 10 minutes I've been talking, and there's so much more to talk about, but I want to discuss with you. There are 3 questions I chose so far. The first question is about Vladek, Art's father. Many critics argue that his portrayal on the graphic novel is unfair. At one point, Art even says he's just like one of the Jews in Nazi propaganda. Do you agree with the critics, or do you disagree and say he's depicted fairly? The second question is about the inconsistency in the use of animals. While frogs, dogs, pigs and deer stand for nationalities, mice stand for religion. So should there be a distinction between Germans and Nazis, or is it fair to treat all Germans like Nazis by depicting them as cats? Art Spiegelman designed every cover of every published edition of Maus himself. Every edition shows a swastika and a cat Hitler. But there's little to no mentioning of Hitler in the actual graphic novel. So what could be an alternative, maybe better fitting cover, in your opinion? While I create and edit this video, I'm already curious for your answers. And those are only the questions I could think of, so maybe there are way better ones you might bring into this session. So let's have a great talk together with our professor. As I already said, probably way too often in this video, one could spend hours talking about Maus, but I only had 10 minutes and 10 additional minutes for our discussion. So let's make the most of it, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Finally, for my last sentence, I want to close the circle. I created this video for my class on graphic novels, and my conclusion shall be exactly for that class. Maus revolutionized the image of comics and graphic novels to this day. The topics stay relevant, forever.